A born and bred New Yorker, Professor Franklin is a Mellon Postdoctoral Fellow in Africana Studies, a passionate interdisciplinary scholar and a trailblazer in the examination of how low-income nations govern disease outbreaks. Professor Franklin completed her PhD in economics at the University of Westminster in London in 2020, focusing on the local governance of the 2014 Ebola outbreak in Sierra Leone and Liberia. As a recipient of the 2022-2023 AAUW Postdoctoral Research Leave Fellowship, Professor Franklin has been hosted at prestigious institutions such as the Macmillan Center for International and Area Studies at Yale University and is currently a fellow for the Governance and Local Development Institute at the University of Gothenburg and many other incredible organizations. As the incoming Mellon Postdoctoral Fellow in the Africana Studies Department, Professor Franklin is excited to teach courses such as the politics of race and racism in Europe. She especially wants to create an inclusive and equitable learning environment to foster student curiosity.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. And thank you, Aroshi, for that introduction. And I also like to thank you, Nina, as well as Judy, for coordinating this event and inviting me here to speak with you all today. So as Aroshi mentioned, I primarily research public health emergencies in low-income countries such as Liberia, Sierra Leone, and West Africa. I'm also going to talk about governance and institutions. So as you can imagine, the context that I work in, these countries are very poor. They have low resources. Their governments basically struggle to deliver basic health services, especially before the 2014 Ebola outbreak, which affected tens of thousands of people. Now, last semester, I taught my first class at Wellesley called Critical Perspectives of Humanitarianism in Black Countries. And so this was looking at how Western nations particularly respond to humanitarian crises such as earthquakes, floods, violence, disease outbreaks. And we talked about concepts like volunteer tourism, disaster capitalism, peacekeeping. And I think that in the United States, political science and international relations, which I'll refer to as IR going forward, discuss these humanitarian issues through either a liberal or rationalist lens, meaning that there's not a lot of diversity in thought. So we often assume that just because something has a humanitarian label on it, that it's automatically good, right? And that our interventions are, doing good for the people who are on the receiving end of it. However, my class spent the entire semester critically deconstructing the power relations between Western countries and countries in the global South, so specifically Africa and the Black Caribbean and Black Latin America. Historically, the modern relationship that we see between the United States, Western Europe, and Black countries started with colonialism. So that was the first foreign policy. And that relationship continued for hundreds of years until the independence movement of the early to mid 20th century. So why did I start off telling you this? As I said, there is a lack of diversity in thought in political science and in IR. So when we discuss the beginnings of modern international relationships, many of you were probably taught about the Treaty of Westphalia and how this brought about concepts of sovereignty, diplomacy, peace-oriented relations. But as this treaty was being signed in 1648, the European powers were literally fighting each other for land and natural resources in North and South America, the Caribbean, Asia, Africa, the Middle East. They were enslaving and killing indigenous people for that land and natural resources. So that concept of Westphalia did not apply to everyone. So in the context of negotiating for humanity, we need to understand the balance of power between countries who are negotiating or really setting the agenda, right? Hence that first learning outcome that you see on the PowerPoint slide. And we also need to ask who has a seat at the table, Then we can examine how these power relations determine that the agenda set on the global health platform. And then for our third learning goal, we will examine some recent examples, and then we're going to wrap up our discussion, coming full circle back to this concept of negotiating for humanity. Does that sound good? Cool. Okay, moment of truth. Let's see if the video works.
When you picture Doctors Without Borders,
What do you see?
do you picture someone who looks like me?
Helping someone who looks like me.
This is a fundraising poster MSF Norway used in 2006. And we've been using pictures like this for a long time, including pictures of me. The problem is, we haven't always given you the whole picture.
The full picture.
Here, we even cropped out the parents of the boy.
Whose name is Ali Hamad. He's a real person, so that he looks even more alone and helpless.
For years, we've used pictures like this
To raise awareness,
to raise money.
to recruit staff.
But today, we recognize that these images
Propagate a single story and perpetuate
racist stereotypes of so-called white saviors.
and powerless victims.
But Doctors Without Borders has always been
Nigerian without borders.
Kenyans without borders.
Filipinos
Without borders.
Haïtiens sans frontières.
Mexicanas sin fronteras.
नेपाली बिना कुनै सिमाना
سوريون بلا حدود.
We just haven't focused on them as much as we should have.
So, you might not know
That of all our colleagues around the world, the largest number are from South Sudan. You might not know
that this is because 4 out of 5 of our colleagues.
are hired locally in the countries where we work.
You might not know
That today, more than half of our international mobile staff,
of which I am one, come from Africa,
the Middle East,
Asia.
and Latin America.
You might not know that Doctors Without Borders has so much diversity,
Because we haven't always shown that to you.
and that is because
Our humanitarian history is unavoidably rooted in the history of colonialism,
and neocolonialism and its stubborn stereotypes
of the white European expert.
and the distant order in need
So now we've begun the long journey to change MSF culture,
and way of communicating and advocating.
and because we all have blind spots, we will certainly stumble along the way.
But this isn't just about getting it done, it's about getting it right.
Some changes should be easier than others.
Like showing a more representative picture of who we really are, and where we are coming from,
When we tell our story.
our whole story.
Of course, that story still includes people who look like me.
Because that is still true.
However, white people shouldn't be the center of every story.
Because that is not the whole story.
And that's why we want to pass the mic,
To our colleagues around the world, much more often.
so that more people from our diverse workforce
And the patients themselves can tell their own story with their own voice, from their own perspectives, and co-own the story. This is important.
So now it's also up to you.
Will you listen to them? We hope you do.
Some say that fewer people will listen when the story isn't told by someone who looks like me.
They say that this kind of poster won't raise as much money, and that means we will save fewer lives.
Will you join us in proving them wrong?
We want to believe you will.
Because this is not about us and them.
It is not about heroes and victims
This is about global solidarity,
and humanitarian justice.
because we are all
just human beings with the same worth and dignity and the same right to live in safety and health.
So, I want to begin by telling you about the Howard School of Thought in International Relations. So this term is coined by Dr. Robert Vitalis, who is an independent scholar and journalist and had actually wrote an entire book about these scholars from Howard University. So Howard, as you may know, is the oldest HBCU in the United States. HBCU stands for Historically Black Colleges and Universities. This image here is Dr. Alan Locke. He was a professor in the political science department at Howard in the early 20th century. So he was actually one of the first scholars to study race relations, especially in the context of revolutions, democracies, and even foreign policy. So Professor Locke, like I said, one of his contributions was that the concept of race was created and rationalized as a biological construct where those who are designated quote-unquote white were believed to be superior physically, mentally, psychologically, and etc. And therefore, this rationalization was used to justify imperialism in North and South America, Asia, Africa, and yes, even in some European countries. Right? Because from the 17th through the 20th century, not all European countries were considered white. So Professor Locke argued against all of the scholars at his time in political science and anthropology that no, race is a social construct, right? And this was designed by elites in order to create tensions and subjugate those without power or who are less powerful. So some of you may know that colonialism was justified by saving or civilizing non-white people, and that white nations argued that they had to safeguard that land and natural resources that these people were incapable of governing, as well as that they could not govern themselves. Now, these concepts of white superiority in diplomatic and imperialistic relations was the dominant ideology among scholars and practitioners up until the mid to late 20th century. These IR scholars established a hierarchy in that American and European societies were considered civilized and other races were divided lower on the scale. So as you can see from this passage, the bottom passage, from former president of Clark University and open eugenicist Dr. G. Stanley Hall, in this inaugural publication of this journal, the Journal of Race Development, that civilized white nations that rule the world and have amassed all the resources that had previously belonged to primitive races now need to turn a new leaf and have a moral and teaching responsibility to non-white people. So that was, again, the beginnings of this journal and the IR Scholarly Forum. So this journal still exists today and is read by the entire Foreign Service and international relations community, so scholars and practitioners alike. In fact, I have a subscription to this journal, and as Wellesley affiliates, you probably all have access to it too. The name of the journal, though, did change. Briefly, in 1919, it was renamed the Journal of International Relations. And the editorial board was still the same, so Dr. G. Stanley Hall, as well as his colleagues, Dr. George Blakesley. But in 1922, it renamed itself to a different title, which we're all familiar with, called Foreign Affairs. So how does this look like in practice today? When we think of ourselves as a global community, such as where are the most developed nations, we tend to think of Western countries, right? And that is part of a historical legacy of early international relations and foreign policy. In fact, many of the indicators that we use to, measure things like human development, economic development, or democratic norms typically place Western countries on top, and other countries are lower down the scale.
We're going to change tack now with focus. It's been exactly 5 years since Haiti was hit by a devastating earthquake in which more than 200,000 people lost their lives. More than 1.5 million were displaced. The international community responded generously with millions of dollars raised, and yet tens of thousands of people are still living in displaced people's camps. Isabel Romero and Johan Baudin have been back to Haiti for today's Focus to find out why.
In the heart of Port-au-Prince, the city's main park used to be a giant tent camp for thousands of quake survivors. The settlement is now dismantled, the place fenced off to keep people at bay. For the authorities, this central historic area is a priority reconstruction zone, but rubble and ruins are everywhere. The scars of the destruction seem as fresh as ever. Meanwhile, some of the people left homeless by the quake have been pushed back just a bit further away. For the past 5 years, Lifette and her family have been living in this hut. And an estimated 80,000 people in Port-au-Prince are still in a similar situation.
4 people live here in this very same room. I cook here, I sleep here, I do everything here. The shower is the toilet. But having a place to cook food, that's most important.
We leave Lifette and head further south by the hillside. 70 families live in this camp, but they've been asked to clear the premises. An NGO is in charge of finding them a roof.
In Haiti, tenants are asked to pay many months' rent in advance, often 6 months and up to 1 full year. So for those who've lost everything in the quake, building a new life in this city in ruins is not easy.
Families are handed out the equivalent of 400 euros to cover these expenses, yet the mood here remains pessimistic.
Within the past 5 years, many NGOs have already come here, but they haven't been able to do much. And besides them, nobody's done nothing.
They've given me a sheet of paper, but I don't know what it says.
Throughout Haiti's capital, dozens of thousands of temporary shelters built by various NGOs have become regular long-term homes. This French town planner has been living here for the past 4 years. He takes us on a tour of the Christ-Roi neighborhood, a place that illustrates what he calls a huge waste of international money.
This here is imported wood. It costs a fortune, something like $2,000 US. Give $3,000 US to a Haitian here and he'll build himself a real house like this one. When we tell people this, they're shocked because they realize how much money has been wasted in the construction of what's just a temporary housing unit. Looking at this, I see a shantytown. Looking at this one, built in the traditional way by the locals, well, I see something that I can call a real house.
Patrick Martin's NGO would like to improve urban planning in this community, but band-aid solutions by former NGOs and haphazard repair work by locals are hindering their efforts.
Haitians have all the necessary means to rebuild their towns. They just lack the technique. It's a shame because locals have been investing thousands of dollars from their own pockets just to consolidate what will remain precarious housing, unplanned neighborhoods, what we'd call a shantytown.
So I'm going to cut it off here. Because I still have 2 more videos I want to show.
Senate investigation blasts the American Red Cross for the way that it used nearly $500 million in donations aimed at helping earthquake victims in Haiti. New at 6, Channel 2's Lori Geary traveled to Haiti earlier this year and knows firsthand why Haitians are still waiting for help here 6 years after that earthquake.
Justin, we've been waiting on this massive report from Senator Chuck Grassley after we traveled to Haiti and saw for ourselves tens of thousands of people still living in temporary housing after 6 years. Well, in his report, Senator Grassley says there are substantial and fundamental concerns about the American Red Cross. The relief agency adamantly disagrees.
A lot of Americans sent money.
Dino Daskar is just one of the Haitian people we met in the outskirts of Port-au-Prince who says he never saw it.
I don't even know the color of their money.
This just released more than 300-page report perhaps shed some light on why almost $500 million in donations aimed at Haitian earthquake relief never got to the people who needed it most. When we traveled to Haiti in January, we found tens of thousands of people still living in temporary housing under USAID tarps 6 years after the 7.0 magnitude earthquake hit.
We have reason to believe that maybe this money wasn't used the way it was intended.
Republican Senator Chuck Grassley opened up his own investigation of how the American Red Cross spent almost $500 million in donations. According to Senator Grassley, the Red Cross spent a quarter of the money raised, $124 million, on management, fundraising, and, quote, program costs. The rest of the funds, some $360 million, went to partner organizations, which took their own cut for administrative expenses. Grassley's office also found of the 20,000 Red Cross workers, there are 3 employees in its internal investigations department.
I will say, recovery is a marathon, not a sprint.
When we talked to an American Red Cross spokeswoman in D.C. during our investigation, she defended the relief organization's work. After the release of Grassley's final report Thursday, they did the same, sending me a statement saying in part, quote, the American Red Cross strongly disagrees with the findings. We have accounted for every penny spent in Haiti. Chairman Grassley's memo does not note a single finding of fraud or abuse.
Transparency brings accountability.
Grassley's office says executives at the Red Cross also tried to stop a review by the Government Accountability Office. The executives claiming they gave the agency everything it asked for, which according to Grassley was not the case. Justin?
So the one thing I will add on that is that that last bullet point is right. So although we are critiquing the Red Cross and their use of funds during the recovery of the 2010 earthquake, we're not accusing them of fraud or like stealing the money, right? But rather it's mismanagement, because as you can see, 1/3 of that went towards overhead expenses. Normally for a charity, overhead expenses should be less than 20%. And so the last video I want to show is actually from ProPublica and NPR. So both news agencies actually did an investigation of Red Cross and the funding that was used. And so I think this also just kind of rounds it up in terms of what they found and what they believe happened.
Once again, for the way it operates and how it's using the money that people donate to it. The latest item, a joint investigation by 2 news organizations pointing to what they say is a failure to deliver on promises of housing in Haiti after the earthquake there 5 years ago. Jeffrey Brown has the story.
January 12, 2010, a catastrophic earthquake ravaged Haiti's capital, Port-au-Prince, shaking whole neighborhoods to bits and leaving 1.5 million people homeless. The American Red Cross raised nearly $500 million for Haiti's relief, far more than any other charity. And a year after the quake, Red Cross CEO Gail McGovern announced plans to create, quote, brand new communities.
We're working on a planned partnership to build permanent housing for people that were left homeless during the earthquake. Under this partnership, USAID would identify and prepare at least 2 locations in Haiti for permanent homes that would include roads, drainage, and other infrastructure. The plan is that the American Red Cross would build these homes, including water and sanitation.
But an investigation by ProPublica and NPR has concluded the Red Cross response was plagued by failures. Despite the lofty goals, documents obtained by the 2 media organizations show that only 6 permanent homes were built with Red Cross funds. They also found inaccurate numbers on how many people were helped by various Red Cross programs. NPR and ProPublica say many displaced Haitians were given short-term rental assistance or housed in temporary shelters like these, prone to termite attacks and unable to withstand tropical storms. Haitians themselves say they are still struggling just to survive.
The living conditions are very hard for the poor. We are sitting here and people don't really come to buy products like they used to. Things are difficult.
In a statement today, the Red Cross criticized the report and touted its accomplishments in Haiti, building and operating 8 hospitals and clinics, providing clean water and sanitation, and moving more than 100,000 people out of makeshift tents. As for housing, the agency argued that Haitian government red tape blocked it from gaining crucial land rights for building. For instance, an agreement for the New Communities project was ultimately canceled because of a land dispute. Laura Sullivan of NPR is one of 2 journalists on the team who reported this story. We invited the American Red Cross to join us, but officials there declined our offer. So, Laura, let me ask you first, give us some background on how this came about and how you reported it.
This was a partnership that NPR did with ProPublica, myself and Justin Elliott and another reporter named Jesse Eisinger back in the fall, where we looked into Hurricane Sandy and Isaac and the Red Cross's response to those storms. And we found that they spent too much time focused on the public relations effort in those storms and failed in a lot of aspects. And then we also looked at, in the fall, some of the questionable things that they say about how they're spending donors' money.
And so it was worth looking at Haiti from there.
Exactly. We ended up being able to see hundreds of pages of internal Red Cross records, emails, and memos that senior managers wrote to one another. We also talked to a dozen current and former Red Cross employees about what happened in Haiti and what happened to the money.
Well, so on the specific issue of creating more housing, the Red Cross cites a lack of land to build on. They cite red tape that made property rights impossible. They're saying that they basically they had to change course and therefore did.
And that is true. It is very difficult to build in Haiti, and a lot of nonprofits had a lot of trouble. But still, it is possible to do. And at this point now, 5 years after the earthquake, other NGOs have been able to build 9,000 homes. The Red Cross has had $500 million and 5 years in Haiti, and they have built 6 homes.
When you're citing the reasons for this failure, a prime one that comes through is what you see as a lack of experience by the Red Cross in how to carry this kind of thing out.
That's something that we heard from a number of Red Cross officials and through the Red Cross's own documents, which just show that this is not an area that they have a lot of familiarity with. They have, years of experience doing immediate disaster relief.
So how does,
providing things like blankets and water, and they did that in Haiti as well. But what they do not know very well how to do and have very little experience doing is rebuilding in a developing country. And yet they outraised other NGOs by hundreds of millions of dollars, even after the immediate disaster relief was over, so that they could do just that.
So how does it play out? I mean, there's a certain amount of money, it goes to immediate emergency relief. And I saw that a year after it happened when they were there providing all kinds of things. But you're saying that after that, they didn't have the knowledge or well, they had the resources, but not the knowledge.
They had the resources, they did not have the knowledge. And one of the senior officials we talked to was in charge of their Haiti shelter program, Lee Mullaney, and he said they just never had a plan for housing. Other people we talked to said this is not anything that they knew how to do. And they were kind of flying blind in some ways in terms of being able to get these housing projects off the ground. And the housing projects that they weren't able to build any homes. They say they provided homes for 130,000 Haitians. This is another number that just did not add up when we actually dug down into it.
The Red Cross has pushed back pretty hard at you today, saying in a statement, the Red Cross is disappointed by the lack of balance, context, and accuracy in the most recent reporting by ProPublica NPR. It is particularly disappointing to see our work misrepresented, considering we answered more than 100 questions in writing and provided an interview with the head of our international programs.
And that it is true. The Red Cross has provided a lot of disaster services in Haiti, and they have certainly spent millions of dollars providing shelter and providing, water and things like that. But at the end of the day, they did not do what they promised Haitians they were going to do. And they did not also do what they promised their own donors they would do. They did answer a lot of our questions. It went back and forth for many months, and it is good to have that information from them. But what that information did show for us, and what their own internal documents show, is that they were not able to provide Haitians the kind of assistance that they had promised them.
Let me just ask you finally, we can stipulate that it is hard to work in Haiti, right?
Absolutely.
To get these kinds of things. Did you see examples where things were working, where housing
Absolutely.
was? Yes.
So that is what was one of the most interesting things about it, is that a number of NGOs have been able to build 9,000 permanent homes at this point. And we went to one project that was done by Global Communities and PCI, where we saw more than 300 homes being built. And the project now, they're building 75 more homes that have running water for people. And they say that a lot of that is because they hired Haitians to do the bulk of the work. Some of the sources and documents that we read show that the Red Cross had a very difficult problem not hiring enough Haitians, and that they had a number of expats that were extremely expensive and also didn't even speak either of Haiti's languages. And one person said, how can you go to a meeting with Haitian government officials when you can't speak the language?
All right, Laura Sullivan of NPR, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I really like this interview because I think, again, she's drilling home that it's about the lack of expertise. So Red Cross is an organization that's really good at doing short-term disaster relief. They're not development experts. You know, they shouldn't have been promising to basically rebuild an entire country, and they don't have the expertise of doing it. They never had the expertise of doing it. And so I think when we, talk about, just coming full circle to what we began with about this idea of experts from European or American countries coming to the global South, and I guess figuring out that, okay, we can do this, but then of course years later you see that they can't, right? So now we only have a couple more slides left, so now I want to quickly switch over to the Ebola outbreak. And this is a quote from Mary Moran. She is an expert on Liberia, and of course she was writing about the Ebola outbreak response to Liberia. And I think this explains the duality of humanitarianism as well as exploitation. So during this outbreak in West Africa, there was a huge scale up of resources after the international community essentially ignored it for the first 8 to 9 months. The 3 main affected countries, Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, received resources from their respective former colonial nations, which was a combination of military interventions, NGOs, and consultants. So again, billions of dollars was literally, raised overnight to address the EVD spread. A tiny amount of that went to the recipient countries' governments in West Africa, but actually not all of the funding and resources that were promised arrived, right? So the troops that were sent to Liberia to build the Ebola treatment centers did not build all the centers that they promised, because by the time they got there, the infection rates were actually declining, right? And so it's also one of the things that we kind of have to think about in terms of academic and lay media communication, where the mainstream literature kind of focuses on the work of Western-based responders and not actual local responders. So by the time the US, the UK, and France intervene, right, how did those infection rates numbers come down? There's not a lot of literature on those first 8 to 9 months of what local communities were doing in order to stop the Ebola outbreak. So now Western-based volunteers and NGOs help. Again, that conversation is largely reported, but not the work of local actors. So by focusing on the weaknesses of governments, it actually justifies the need to intervene. But again, this is kind of for short-term resolution and not really sustainable long-term goals for the recipient countries. And this is, again, a second quote by Moran on the same article. So again, images, helpless Black and brown people that do not understand Western medicine or science, usually the backdrop of humanitarian interventions. However, ironically, when COVID arrived, and COVID, as you remember, started in Western countries, the irony is that we now see predominantly, white countries having similar logistic and intervention failures, such as gaining the public trust, combating rumors and conspiracies, trouble with rolling out logistics and clinical interventions, such as vaccines and testing. However, there was no media coverage portraying Americans or Europeans as uneducated, irrationally sticking to their cultural customs, not believing the science, right? But what you may not know is that African countries actually did a whole lot better at responding to COVID-19, even though they had way less resources to do it than North American or European governments. So finally, just the takeaway. So during the Ebola, again, there was a huge push that countries like Sierra Leone needed more equipment, more modern resources at healthcare facilities such as ventilators, and that's absolutely true, they do. But as you remember from the earlier article quote that we've read, when COVID-19 struck, Sierra Leone only had 1 ventilator in the country. So COVID-19 2020, so 6 years after Ebola, these countries still did not get the modern resources that they needed. Even though we had celebrated the end to the Ebola outbreak in 2016, there is still a silent epidemic that continues. And the very last clip that I want to show you is from, is from an online webinar that I did a couple months ago called Ebola 10 Years On, where we had speakers from West Africa. I just want to show you the response from Dr. Bernice Dawn, who was the former Minister of Health in Liberia, and what she thinks is the way forward for working with the international community to rebuild stronger healthcare systems. I see this first one here is directed to Dr. Dawn. From your experience as the former Minister of Health in Liberia, how can international funding be structured to not only address immediate health crises, but also contribute to the establishment of enduring healthcare systems? Are there successful models or examples where INGOs have played a pivotal role building long-term healthcare infrastructure in collaboration with local entities?
Okay, thank you. Yes. As a country, the first thing is to provide the directions for the country and for those who want to help you. So countries normally will develop strategic plans and policies to provide directions for the country. Take, for instance, the health sector policy strategy on where you want to take the health sector over a period of time, maybe 5 to 10 years. Now, implementing the policy and the strategy is another thing, because many times people develop policy strategies and it's a document and it is sitting and accumulating dust. So working with especially the decentralized level where the implementation is actually done. Normally we do an operational plan, which is annual. And in doing that operational plan is to sit with the implementing, all your implementing partners within the county and plan to align their resources to the plan to be able to implement. Now, with my experience, the first thing is if the plan, the national plans and policies are done together, it provides the opportunity for donor partners to also be able to align their resources to your priority. So that's the first thing. Now, those resources, when it comes to the implementation level, those resources also need to align properly to the operational plans that you have in country. And jointly you can monitor together. So in Liberia, what we did was to organize the Health Sector Coordination Committee, the HSCC, which is where the health sector policy decisions are made. It is normally chaired by the Minister of Health, co-chaired by the WHO rep. All the donor partners are present there, and they tend to give inputs into the strategy and the policy. So assign some of their technicians during the development process. And so when they are planning their support, they plan along those lines for us. And that works. Now, there are other examples. I did mention earlier which systems will continue to be weak. We've had situations where donor partners work with us to build financial management systems, for example. Currently, I'm at the University of Liberia at the College of Health Sciences. Before I got there in 2019, the College of Health Sciences had never managed $500 budget. Everything was highly centralized. But this is an institution where faculty members need to write research grants, they need to do research, they need to publish for their own professional group. The systems were not there. We were supported with donor funding by another U.S. institutions to build the Office of Sponsored Research, to build the Office of Financial Management. We have a monitoring and evaluation system in place at the college. And we have a human resource office. We have a communication office. Those systems were not there. And so when people want to support you, they don't see those systems there. It becomes risky to put in their money. Since we started in 2019 to present, we've managed over $10 million, or we are managing over $10 million at the moment. It's because the systems are there. Of course, with the system currently, we are not independent yet. We are still working with the partners and growing the system until we can take on fully. But most of the work is done within our system, and they have high-level supervision for it. And I think that is a very good model. Because at the end of the day, when the international partner is not there, that system continues within the university. Thank you.
Okay. And that's it. So your thoughts? Okay, clapping is a good thought, yes. But Dr. Dawn said that, she feels that this system works, right? So again, coming full circle about negotiating for humanity. What are your thoughts on today's lessons? Yes, you, and you there in the back. So you first, and then you second.
I think personally one central lesson I've gotten is there's much importance in integrating the people who are living there and the government there. Instead of coming and just doing it by yourselves, for you to be able to understand the issue at hand, the people who understand it best are the people who are experiencing it. So for example, even like with the Haiti people and how the houses that were built by the Haitians were like better compared to what others were doing. I think that has been the key thing that I've taken from the talk today.
Thank you.
Yeah, I find it so interesting how even around the world or just in, because a lot of what you talked about you see within the U.S. itself. So one of the questions that you posed about like colonialism and where people see, I guess like one of the questions I think that you posed was like where are considered the best colleges or the worst colleges, and even in the U.S. you see that they're in like the Northeast, like around, especially in New England, where you don't see many like Black and brown people in the first place to start with, and then meanwhile schools in the South are criticized where that's where like there's a huge population of Black and brown people, which I just found super interesting. And then it also kind of tied to those organizations that I feel like we see a lot of times that even start with high schoolers, where it's like sending high schoolers to like high schoolers in a position of privilege out to another country to be there for a little bit so that they can get something on their college application really quick and then come back and then never go back and kind of like never look back at that work. So those are just some interesting thoughts that I was having while we were having this discussion.
We have one down here.
Something that like really struck me was in the Red Cross interview when, or in one of the, I think the NPR interview about the Red Cross, how,
NPR
how the NPR correspondent was saying that the Red Cross like has been having has a tendency to blame the Haitian government for issues with I guess distributing aid within Haiti, and I think that sort of was a theme this morning in our like first lecture of the day as well, and the idea that like international organizations will place the blame on like local governments and assume that because a government doesn't operate within their like framework, it is like by nature a shortcoming. I think that really highlights like the issue in like communication and like cross-cultural understanding of how a country will or like international like Western organizations see like Western frameworks as like the only way in which to operate, and as soon as a government doesn't adjust to accommodate their methods, even though they're working within another country, another government, that is seen as like the fault of the country, and then justifies like not providing aid or not distributing jobs to like using expats instead of like Haitian construction workers. And yeah, I think it's like just a real deflection of the blame in like international resource sharing.
Oh yes, we have one person here.
I'm really interested in the role of the media in constructing a narrative that then determines global priorities, especially with regards to the AIDS epidemic and how it was only prioritized once it became clear that it was an economic imperative as well. Thinking about how there was so little coverage of the AIDS epidemic from the early years because it was primarily affecting gay men. And thinking about how these same patterns are continued and how priorities are determined, like thinking about how there are narratives of helpless Black and brown people that you were describing. And so just thinking about, I'm using that phrase a lot, but I'm really fascinated with how much responsibility the media has, and how even though we've recognized that, there still needs to be so many massive changes in how narratives are constructed internationally.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Okay. All right. I mean, these are all great thoughts, right? And definitely when you say you're using thinking a lot, I'm definitely thinking a lot about this too. And so it's, I mean, how do we negotiate for humanity? I think that's just an ongoing question. There's no one answer or one size fits all solution. I think it's just, again, thinking about thinking what everyone has mentioned here as, you know, a group, you know, working with local communities, definitely needing to have someone to speak the language, right? So that should be kind of number one. And you talk about cross-cultural communications. I mean, I think some organizations are there and they're trying to do that, but it is a long journey. I just hope that, at least from the academic side of it, we can explore these concepts and explore these issues that come up, and then hopefully it transfers over to the practitioner side of it too. So thank you all again. I'm also aware that I am cutting into your lunchtime, so I don't want to be that person. But if you signed up for lunch with me and you want to talk more about this, then more than happy to. As well as you got the PowerPoint slides, so you can watch all these videos in its entirety.